First Things, episode number 39.
I seem to be lost.
And so you're working around the clock so you don't take time for yourself to feel like an actual human being.
I used to feel like no matter how hard I worked, I was just spinning my wheels.
Trying to be perfect, we try to have everything in place at one point in time, and you can't.
Hello, my friends. Welcome back to First Things, the podcast dedicated to practical productivity based on modern research. My name is Brandon Vaughn, and it's my goal to help you apply productive solutions to your life to help you live with less stress, greater passion, and amazing results. So good to have you back with us yet again today as we are in Chapter 9 of the Assertiveness Workbook. So if for some reason this is the first show that you have joined us on, just as a reminder, this show is about first things, and it is in the productivity area, and there's a lot of great shows out there on productivity, many of whom I listen to on occasion as I'm able to, a lot of great tips and tricks out there. What I noticed in so many of the shows that I wanted to hear is what about the things that really trip me up, what I call the first things. Now, when I originally started the show, a lot of my emphasis around first things were about, what's your true north, what's your things that make you passionate, and that's still a theme of the show that you'll hear me talk about several times. But I realized as I started going into these different topics that there's a lot of what I would consider foundational material, like how we think, or how we speak to ourselves, or how we deal with failure, how we can be more assertive, how we deal with procrastination. And if we don't get those things right, we can try all of the productivity tips in the world, and for me, they never work. Because if I'm battling against what I call stinking thinking, and my thoughts are derailing me constantly, I can try all of the apps in the world. They will never do me any good because I will always be sabotaging myself in my thinking. So you'll hear me talk about in the show certain things that you probably won't ever hear on many of the other productivity shows. And there's some great ones out there. Timothy Moser has one, although I know he's focused a lot more, I think, in his memory area right now, which is really doing good. Eric Fisher has one on Beyond the To-Do List. Michael Hyatt has one that he talks a little bit more about leadership, sometimes than productivity. I think he started doing more productivity, and now it's a little bit more marketing and leadership type of things. And there's a bunch of other ones out there, people that are kind of life hack type of things that have some really good things. I think where this show feels a need is just in the area, again, of this foundation. How do we deal with our thinking? How do we deal with failures? How do we deal with paradigms and worldviews that basically can trap us in life? So for those of you who have listened to me for a long time, apologies for boring you with this at the very beginning. But if you're new to me, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the show in case you didn't want to go all the way back to the very first episode to listen to me there. And also, the show has evolved. We're nearly at episode 40. I cannot believe that we are quickly approaching 50 episodes of this show. And this is a big thing. So if you're joining us for the first time, we are doing a weekly study on assertiveness, and we've picked a book basically to work through that I think would benefit you reading it and putting it into your library. It is called the Assertiveness Workbook. And you can find a link to that book in the show notes at firstthingsproductivity.com/39. If you scroll all the way down to the bottom of that page, you will see links to this book if you'd like a quick way to buy the book. It's not necessary, again, that you buy the book to listen through the show. I think all of these episodes will stand as their own, but it would be very much like taking a college class without wanting to buy the textbook. And I know many of us would have enjoyed doing that in some classes, especially classes that never actually used the book, and we ended up spending hundreds of dollars on a book that did us no good. But this is very much like a college class, if you will. We're studying assertiveness. We're taking a course on assertiveness, and this is our workbook, and it has homework in it and extra reading, and you can get more grounded in it. So I do highly encourage that you support the author of this book. But we're using the book as more of a springboard into the topic as we can talk about it in various aspects. We are halfway through this topic of assertiveness. I'm not really sure what we're going to do after assertiveness. I'm starting to think about that now. We will probably go back and do some one-episode topics for a few weeks and then probably get into a lengthy study again, maybe on happiness. I know I've promised that for a long, long time, so we may do a weekly study on happiness after this. So Chapter 9 in this book starts up a 4-chapter series on dealing with feedback and how can we give feedback, how we can give positive feedback, constructive feedback, how we can receive constructive feedback, how we can deal with criticism we'll finally get into in the book. But this particular chapter may seem kind of like an odd chapter to some people. It is called Taking the Good, Receiving Positive Feedback. And that, again, may seem really odd. Why on earth would we need to devote a whole episode to talk about receiving positive feedback? Well, I think it will become apparent as we get into this today that some of us have a real problem with this, and maybe all of us have a problem with this in some ways. And it can be a real hindrance. And if you aren't in a position in your life that you can actually receive positive feedback, then you're going to have a lot of trouble in these other areas. And I think these other areas of taking constructive feedback, how we deal with criticism, probably affects all of us who are listening to me right now, including myself. There is a group of us who are listening, including myself, that have a problem with positive feedback. And it can derail everything of what we're going to be learning. So we want to go ahead and put into place some basic principles that will help us overcome this. Now, the author starts out by giving a scuba diving example, a pretend conversation where the student is asking the instructor for comments about how they're doing. Now, many of us may wish that we didn't have feedback in our lives, but actually, that would be pretty horrific. We are very social creatures. Even those of us who prefer to spend time alone, who may consider ourselves more introverted type of people, we still crave some type of social feedback. And a world with no feedback at all would be a world of complete madness. Imagine going to talk to someone and all they do is stare at you. In fact, I don't know if you've noticed this, but anytime somebody is silent while you're talking, have you ever noticed how you talk more because you suddenly get very nervous? I know this isn't a very nice thing to do, but many times when I'm in a situation, especially a hostile situation, where someone is very critical, is highly aggressive to me, I will go into a very silent mode because I know that human nature is that we get very uncomfortable with silence. And so if a person is very hostile toward me, they want me to respond to feed that energy many, many times. And if I sit there and just look at them and don't say anything, all of a sudden it seems to reverse the tables and they start getting nervous and they start softening many, many times, I've noticed. But it's a basic principle. We need feedback. We need to know how we're doing. We need for other people to help us see ourselves because we can't always see ourselves. And feedback is a big part of that. Imagine that you're in a rock band who's getting up to play. And sometimes you may have actually seen this in concert where a band is up there playing and they end the song and nothing happens. Nobody claps. Everybody's just staring at them. That is a horrific thing. And you could take that to any type of thing. The author says this. He says, we need feedback from others. Sometimes we can't see what we're doing. Sometimes we don't know how to judge the situation. Sometimes we can't tell whether our actions are having the desired effect. Now, unless you go about videotaping yourself, which is sometimes a cool thing to do, although it can be very awkward to look at yourself, we can't really judge ourselves. We can't judge our social behavior. We need other people to help us with that by providing us feedback. Sometimes we may not really know that we're responding in a particular way that is being perceived wrongly, or maybe we're even behaving in less than ideal ways. And we need somebody to help us see that many times. And this is where feedback can definitely come in a great, great way. Here's what the author says about this. He says, we can use feedback from others to adjust our behavior. Of course, we wouldn't want to base our entire lives on the opinions or demand of others, but it can be helpful to know what they see when they look our way. Other people, however, don't always see us very clearly. Their judgments of us are flawed. So we want to come to a balance here because many times I've talked about in this show, we don't want to base our worth on the opinion of other people because people can be fickle many, many times. And we need to know who we are apart from what other people say that we are. And I firmly believe that, and I think it needs to be a pillar in our lives, a foundational pillar of our lives. But to balance that, at the same time, you've also heard me say numerous times that I believe that everyone is my teacher. So while I firmly believe that we should not base our identity upon what other people tell us about ourselves, on the other hand, I don't want to turn a deaf ear on what people are telling me because I realize that I can use that information to learn of myself and to make myself better. It doesn't mean that I have to base my identity off of it. It doesn't mean that I have to have a bad day because of what they said to me. It doesn't mean that I have to believe what they say. But this is a source of information. Many of you know who Warren Buffett is, very famous investor who is very rich. Well, even if you don't necessarily believe in Warren Buffett, what if Warren Buffett came to you and said, I have seen you and known you for a little bit, and I don't do this for anyone, but every day I'm going to send you an email and tell you what stocks and markets that I'm investing in, and you don't have to use it, but I'm just going to send it to you. Well, I imagine that many of us would welcome that. Maybe we're not big investors. Maybe we don't really think we're going to follow his advice, but hey, it might be cool to actually receive it. And every now and then we may say, I think that's a good idea. I'm going to do what he did. Many days we may be like, well, I don't know. Now, Warren Buffett's pretty famous, pretty rich, so we might actually end up following his advice quite a bit because he's trustworthy. Well, take that maybe to another example of someone that maybe you don't trust quite as much, but they still may have something to show you. They still may have something to teach you. And take it to the worst case. Let's take somebody that is completely flawed about their judgment of you, and they get it wrong 99.9% of the time. Well, they may stumble across that 0.01% of something, of a gold nugget, that if you're looking for that, you can latch on and say, wow, this is going to make a big difference. Everything else they're saying is nothing but junk, throwing it away. But wow, thank you for this little gold nugget. I think that's a great way to live life. It's hard for some people, quite frankly. Some people quite annoy us. Some people have very judgmental perspectives of life. It's very hard to actually look for gold nuggets among what they say. But you can quickly get into this habit of just going through life and saying, this person said this, I don't agree with it, I'm going on. This person said this, well, I don't agree with their tone and they were very hateful in what they said, but I guess I could see maybe that sometimes I do this. I will think about it and maybe see if I can improve in this area, but I'm not going to take their condemnation. I'm not going to take their guilt trip, their manipulation. I'm not going to feel down about who I am because of how they said that to me. There's a way that we can process life in which we can let every person be our teacher, and I would encourage you to think about that. Now, the author lists several ways that judgments can be flawed by people. And I want to pick up on one of these, but let me read the other ones for you really quick. One way that people can get such a flawed judgment of ourselves is that they guess what we're thinking or feeling or what we meant to do. Guesses that are very often wrong. We are not mind readers, and many times there's people who will judge us based upon what they think we feel or what we meant to do, and they don't really know what we meant to do. They're nothing but guesses. Some of the flaws are based around hopes or fears about how we might act, or that they overestimate their own influence on our behavior. Many people feel like they can control other people's behavior, even if they don't say that exactly. Just subconsciously, they feel like they can, which can be a big trap for many bosses or managers, feeling like they overestimate the influence on people's behavior. The person talking to us may have unrealistic ideas about what appropriate behavior is, or defining what appropriate behavior is as if their definition is the gold standard for everyone. Some people have a desire to control us with their feedback. And that's the feedback that we get, is their push to control us. Now, again, I go back to say that I really believe that you can enter into such a state of mind that a person that is deliberately trying to manipulate and control you still may have a gold nugget buried deep among the pile of crap they are putting in your life if you're willing to dig for it. Now, I do think it's fair to come back and say, why would I want to dig for that? If they present me a big pile of crap in my life, I'm going to just move on to something that isn't like that. And that's fair. It really is a fair statement to say that. But at the same time, if you are fascinated by gold nuggets in your life, then yes, I say it may be worth digging and finding the gold nugget among all of that they put into your life. You may disagree, and that's perfectly okay. I want you focused on gold nuggets. So if you aren't the adventurous type and want to dig through a big pile of crap to find the gold nugget, then don't. Go wander elsewhere in life and find the easier gold nuggets that aren't buried under so much stuff. But I'm telling you that many of those piles that you walk around, many of those piles that you walk away from, there's usually a gold nugget in there somewhere. There's a learning opportunity, there's a growth opportunity in there if we're willing to see it. And again, it may mean that 99.9% of it is pure crap, but there's something in there for us if we're willing to look for it. Some people just have a desire to hurt us. There are people like that in this world. And, this is one of those areas, again, where I will think, okay, here's a person deliberately trying to hurt me. So if I'm using Brandon's gold nugget analogy, how do I deal with a situation like that? Well, keep in mind, when I say gold nugget, I'm not necessarily saying that something they say has some ring of truth to it. Sometimes just the relationship itself may be the gold nugget. So if I have a person that's desiring to hurt me and I distance myself from them and save myself from that pain and hurt, that in itself may be a gold nugget. That is a learning opportunity to say, this person desires to hurt me, and I'm so glad I see that. See, that's the learning opportunity to me. I see that this person is up to no good, they desire to hurt me, and I'm not going to spend my time with that person. There's my gold nugget. So you see, the gold nugget can come a lot of different ways, including just processing life and distancing yourself from people who desire to manipulate you and hurt you. And the last one he mentions is there's a tendency to give vague and unhelpful feedback. And he gives several examples of this, such as, you should know better. Well, what does that mean? Has anybody ever told you that? You should know better. That's vague feedback. It doesn't help you at all. I thought it went okay. Well, what does that mean? I thought you did a decent job. Some things I liked, others I didn't. Well, okay, what did you like? What didn't you like? And there can be a flawed judgment. Somebody comes, why would you base your life off of something like some things I like, some things I didn't, and let that ruin your day? Because there's nothing there that you can actually grow with. And you may say, okay, well, Brandon, where's the gold nugget there if somebody tells you that? Well, my gold nugget in that instance may be simply that I don't like that feedback, and I'm not going to give somebody some vague feedback like that. There's a learning opportunity there. I'm not learning of myself. I'm learning how to possibly be a better communicator, maybe a more thoughtful human on this planet by giving more helpful feedback than something vague like that. So I'm going to go to the end of the chapter and then go back to the middle of the chapter because I want to mention why do people have a hard time accepting positive compliments. So we kind of got off tangent a little bit, but it was in the book about how people's judgments could be flawed about us. But now specifically about positive feedback, why do some people have problems with positive feedback? And then we want to go back and say how we block positive feedback in our lives and kind of end on that. Well, let me read this straight from the book about why compliments are not accepted. He mentions 5 things and see if any of these 5 things resonate with you. First, he says, many people have been taught that it is conceited to accept a compliment. They think that compliments should always be treated like hot potatoes and should be gotten rid of as soon as possible. There is definitely an element in some of our lives where we feel like receiving a compliment is bragging, it's conceited, that it's not humble. That humility is about denying the positive and accentuating the negative or the neutral. So if somebody comes along and pays you a compliment, you can't receive it, you can't acknowledge it because it will make you prideful, it will make you conceited, you will not have humility in your life, and that is not the truth. It is definitely another form of stinking thinking that we have in our lives. The second thing he says is that some people feel the need to restore balance. A compliment is a positive, so to balance it out, they have to devalue the compliment, eliminate the positive, or insult themselves to balance it with a negative, or give the other person a compliment in return, a positive for a positive. So we live our lives basically as if it's this seesaw or this balance, and we feel like this yin-yang type of mentality in life that if there's a positive in our life, and we do this subconsciously, I don't think people necessarily think this way in specific thoughts, but subconsciously it's like we have to balance it out so that we don't live in this fearful Disneyland mentality of it's all good, therefore we must balance it with the bad. Therefore we may devalue the compliment, which we'll talk about in just a minute. We may insult ourselves, or we may basically push aside the compliment and just return the compliment to the other person to try to balance that out. The third thing he says is that some people fear that accepting a compliment will leave them in debt to the other person. The only way to avoid the debt is to get rid of or repay the compliment. So in this manner, we are afraid that if we acknowledge a compliment, if we receive a compliment, that it places us in debt to that person, and therefore they may expect something of us. And how can we say no after what they just said to us? I mean, this person was so nice, they paid me this great compliment. Now, how can I turn around and tell them no about something? And that eats away at a few of us to the point that we push away the compliment because we don't want to feel indebted to anyone. We don't want to risk that somebody may try to manipulate or control us. And we fear that that's the way that some people may try to manipulate us is through compliments. So we don't even want compliments. So we are proactive in a negative way to push the compliments out of our lives. Number 4, which is probably to me the biggest reason that any of us who are listening that have a hard time receiving positive compliments, it's more than likely this one. All of them are good, but this one I really feel like is hitting the nail on the head. Many people have a low self-image. Compliments don't fit this image, so these people don't know what to do with them. They think there must be some other explanation for the positive impression they have made, perhaps luck or good lighting or the sheer stupidity of the person offering the compliment. And I find this to be so true in many people's lives, including mine, that we can see ourselves in such low standards, such a low self-image, that surely this other person is wrong. How many of you have ever thought, somebody says, you know, you're a really great person, or I really like hanging around you, and some of us in our minds think, some of us say it out loud, if you only knew the real me. See, that is a low self-image. And we're basically saying, you wouldn't pay me that compliment if you knew the real me. You would condemn me. You would beat me down like the person I really should be, because I'm a person that deserves to be beat down. I'm a person that doesn't deserve compliments. And if you knew the real me, you would never pay me any compliment like that. Or some of us think it's just happenstance. It's luck. It's like, wow, you must not have had any other person better on your mind today, or you must not have seen old Joe or Sue over there, because if you had met them, you would have definitely paid them the compliment instead of me. So you must have just felt really great today and couldn't find them, and therefore I received this coincidental compliment from you. And, you know, that's a big area for us. I know we probably need to do a series over image at some point and talk about how we can come up with better images that aren't based upon the opinions of other people. How do we deal with low self-images? And we've talked about this at times in the show. We've talked about it from various aspects, but maybe we need to do something very dedicated on that at some point. The last thing he says why compliments are usually not accepted is that some people worry about the motives behind the compliment. As a result, they respond suspiciously and negatively, such as, why did she say that? They wonder if they are being set up and forget that simply accepting a compliment does not give others power. Now, I kind of hit upon some of this when we were talking about being in debt to another person. These two points are probably related. But sometimes when people pay us a compliment, we're suspicious. What do you want? Is what we immediately say in our minds. Somebody comes and says, wow, you look really nice today. And our first thought is negative. It's like, what are they after? What do they want from me? They're setting me up for something. And we have a very negative view of what people's motives are. We suspect that their motives aren't pure. Now, granted, we maybe have a track record showing us that people obviously use compliments sometimes for manipulation purposes. But it still doesn't mean that even if that is the person's motivation, that you can't receive the compliment. It doesn't mean that receiving the compliment automatically puts you in debt to them or gives them power over your life. You can receive a compliment and turn right around and tell that person no. It is possible to do something like that. So the author goes in the middle of the book talking about several areas in which we avoid positive feedback. So if any of this has resonated with you, then I want to see if you have one or two of these techniques in your life that you utilize to basically push back on positive feedback. So let's talk about some of the ways in which we do that. The very first way the author mentions is ignoring the compliment. That is, you receive a compliment, and instead of acknowledging that, you change the subject. You walk away. You don't even acknowledge it at all. You basically pretend that you didn't even hear it. So he gives an example, which I'll paraphrase. Somebody comes up to you and says, you look really nice today, and you brush it off and say, hey, where do you want to go eat lunch today? Or you say something like, oh, it's good to see you. I was thinking about trying to find you to ask you something, and you completely change the subject by ignoring that compliment. This is an area I've done quite a bit in my life. If I'm honest with you, I will many times ignore things that people will say. I will sometimes not acknowledge it. I will say, oh, okay, hey, that reminds me, and then I'll change the subject. I've done that many, many times in my life. Many times that I have a compliment and it strangely makes me feel uncomfortable because maybe that low self-image. I'm a person that doesn't deserve a compliment. I'm a person that deserves condemnation. I deserve scrutiny. I deserve giving me a hard time because I just don't think I'm a great person. And when I've had that negative self-image, therefore I want to avoid compliments because it hurts in a way, because it clashes against this negative self-image that I have of myself. How about this? Denial. How many times have somebody given you a compliment and you contradicted it? Such as, you look very nice today. No, I don't. I look awful today. And you totally contradict it. You battle the person that's given you the compliment. That was a great presentation today. No, I don't really think it was that great. I could have done a lot better. And you totally dismiss it. Now, this can be used in conjunction with the third one that the author mentions, and that's arguing. And that's where you try to unravel the argument for the compliment. Somebody gives you a compliment, and then you start giving them all of the different reasons why they're wrong about something like that. Such as, let's go back to the presentation. Your presentation was really good today. And you say, no, the projector wasn't very good. It kept blinking on and off. And I think the slides could have been a little bit better in places and flowed a little bit better. And so it's like you're in a courtroom and you're presenting facts to say, let me prove that you're wrong. And you argue with people that give you the compliment, which when you think about it, when we're talking about it, doesn't that seem kind of stupid? Somebody pays you a compliment and you're going to argue with them. But I think if some of you analyze your life, you'll see that you actually use this technique when somebody tries to pay you a positive compliment. Joking is another mechanism that we use. That we take a compliment that somebody gives us and we try to turn it into some joke. Maybe we use sarcasm in some way. Like again, somebody comes up and says, you look really nice today. And you say, yeah, oh, right. And you play it off as if it was some joke. This is the example that the author gives where the compliment is, listen, I really appreciate the help that you gave me when my mother was so sick. And your response is, oh, right, like I had anything better to do. You turn it into a joke. It's a defense mechanism again, which is kind of strange and kind of sad if you think about it, that someone pays you a compliment and you can't receive it. And instead you turn it into a defense mechanism and push it back to them and turn it into a joke. Another mechanism is a self-insult. The receiver may try to balance the positive feedback with self-imposed insults. So basically you receive the compliment, but then you criticize yourself at the same time. The author gives this as an example. The compliment, you made great time on that last hill, like in a running thing. And your response is, I guess it wasn't too bad for a fat old guy. So you sort of receive the compliment. I guess it wasn't too bad for a fat old, then you put yourself down. And so many times I've done this. I've heard other people do this. Well, you did great on that presentation today. I guess it wasn't that bad for someone airheaded like me. And you'll put yourself down. You will degrade yourself. And it's kind of this balance approach again, that it's like you're trying to balance the good with the bad. Or it's because of your negative self-image that you've got to insert that in there to make it more real or to deflate the compliment in some way. Another mechanism is questioning, where we will put the person who paid the compliment up on the witness stand like in a courtroom, and we will start drilling them with questions. So you look very nice today. And then we say, why would you say that? I don't think I do. You must be blind. What is it that you think I look so great today about? And we will drill them and ask them questions because we can't receive the compliment. Another thing that we will do is narrowing. And, I don't know if I've ever really thought about this until I read it in the book. And that is that the receiver of the compliment will accept a smaller version of the compliment than was intended. So the compliment is, you look terrific today. And our response is, it's these socks my sister gave me. So we will take the compliment, which is, you look terrific, and we will narrow it down to something really small and insignificant. Oh, it's this. So you did great on your presentation today. And you say, well, it's that one particular slide in the graphic I used that really brought it together for me, as if everything else is pure junk. And everything else is, I disagree with you. It didn't look terrific. But it was just this one thing on this one slide, and that's what made it look nice. You cook something for someone and they said, boy, that tasted delicious. And you say, well, it's this special spice that I put in. Like everything else was just mediocre. And if you hadn't done the little spice, well, then that would excuse it. And therefore, it would have just been average. We narrow it down to something insignificant. And then the last type of technique that he mentions is what he calls a boomerang. And we mentioned this a few minutes ago. That's when you quickly return the compliment. So the author says, the compliment is, you were funny tonight. And our response is, you, on the other hand, are hilarious every night. It's like a game of poker in which someone places down a bet and then we place a bet higher than them. Oh, you're going to give me a compliment. Well, I'm going to give you a compliment that trumps that one and is actually higher than that. So again, you did a great job on your presentation today. And we come back and say, yes, but man, I can't even hold a candle to you. You do great presentations all the time. And basically, we negate their compliment, we toss it away, and instead try to elevate them instead. And this is another area I do quite a bit. I've noticed in my life is that if somebody pays me a compliment, I will usually turn it back around and compliment them to a higher degree. They'll come and they'll say, I really appreciate you helping me on this particular project. It was really great. And I will say, yes, but I just got to tell you, I'm really thankful for all the help you always give me. And then I'll trump it. I will basically almost negate their compliment by shoving back a higher compliment to them. Now, why is this such a big deal? Well, again, I want to say that I really believe you're not going to be able to give compliments. You're not going to be able to successfully deal with critical comments. And you're going to always have a hard time giving a constructive critical comment to someone if you can't receive compliments. If your self-image, for example, is so darkened to the state that you can't even receive a compliment, well, that's going to affect how you deal with criticism. I mean, I think that makes sense. But if you can't even receive a compliment, how are you going to deal with criticism? You're going to internalize that criticism. So if you see a problem with this area of receiving positive feedback, it very much can be like a thermometer telling you that you've got an area here that's off whack, and therefore you need to pay attention to this. Second thing I would say is you do deserve comments sometimes, compliments, and there's nothing wrong with that. You are unique on this planet. You don't always get up and hit home runs. You're not always going to be perfect, and that's not the purpose in life, to be perfect. Your purpose in life is to be creative, to be passionate, to pursue those. Sometimes you're going to fail. That's part of life. But you're not going to always fail, no matter what you think. Some of you think you always fail, and that's further from the truth. You will succeed sometimes, and when you succeed, you deserve to be complimented for it. And I know that some people with negative self-images will really cringe when I say that, but you do. You deserve for someone to come along and say, you did a really good job, thank you. And the third thing I want to mention is the fact that it's very insulting to the other person. We aren't really respecting the other person if they pay us a compliment and we trash it, we upgrade it, we deflect it, we ignore it. We aren't respecting that other person. Yes, we may feel awkward about it, but we're going to make them feel awkward if we ignore it or we push it away. We're going to make them feel like they are stupid. We're going to make them feel frustrated. We're going to make them feel uncomfortable. And very likely, they may never pay you another compliment in your life, or they'll be very leery of paying you a compliment. And remember, the whole thing of assertiveness that we're talking about is this mutual respect between people. So I'm going to respect myself, but I'm also going to respect the other person. And if the other person feels this way toward me, then I pay them the ultimate respect by acknowledging that compliment, not ignoring it, not pushing it away. If they said it and they wanted to say it, my ultimate respect is to listen to that compliment and to acknowledge it and just simply receive it. I don't know if you've ever had anyone in your life that denies or tosses back compliments, but if you do, think about how you feel. Think about a time that you have complimented someone and they very negatively reacted to that. How did that make you feel? The person that gave the compliment. So what is the alternative then to all of this? So if someone pays us a compliment, what should we do? What are you saying we should do, Brandon, if someone pays us a compliment? Well, we shouldn't make it so hard. We really shouldn't. We make life very hard. Let me read this straight from the book. The alternative is simply to accept the compliment. Let it in. Thank the person offering the compliment and do so without narrowing it down, without apologizing, without returning it immediately. A simple thank you will do. It is not arrogant to accept a compliment. It is polite. It tells the giver that you value and appreciate their opinion. Here are some examples. Thank you. Thanks. I worked hard on it. I'm glad you liked it. Thanks. I appreciate the fact that you noticed. Thanks. I feel good about it too. The key point is that a compliment is a gift to be accepted. It is not a bomb needing to be diffused, nor a volleyball needing to be returned. So this is a very simple thing. It's maybe too simple that many of us have ever thought about. All you have to do is just simply say thank you. Just 2 simple words. That's all that you have to do. You don't have to make a big effort. In fact, if you think about it, many of our efforts to avoid compliments are very long-winded and complicated unless we ignore it. Think about how much simpler it would be just to say 2 simple words, thank you. That ends it, and you go on with your life instead of making this big argument in which you take 5 or 10 minutes to diffuse the compliment in the first place. So here's what I would suggest that you do this week, especially if you feel like you face this issue in your life in some way. Look for 1 or 2 compliments this week, and they'll come. If they don't come, then just go to a restaurant in which maybe the waiter or the person waiting on you says, thank you for coming in today. Hey, there's a compliment. It may not be a great compliment. It may be scripted, but there's your chance to practice. And all I want you to do is to work on saying, thank you. Thank you for coming in today. And you say, why, thank you. And that's all you do. Practice it this week. Now, if you're in a position in your family, in your work, where someone says something really nice about you, that's all I want you to do is to say, this week, I'm going to look for one opportunity where someone says something nice to me, and I'm just going to simply say thank you and drop it. I'm not going to go into it. I'm just going to say, well, thank you. And then I'm just going to leave it there. Find something this week and make it a goal for yourself. I'm going to find something this week to just simply say thank you to a compliment that I received and just leave it there. I would love to know how it goes for you, especially if this is something that you've dealt with. I'm going to do that this week. I'm going to look intentionally for something up at my work where someone compliments me, and I'm just going to simply say thank you and leave it there. Next week, we are going to get into the next chapter about feedback, and that is called Countdown to Confrontation. So how do we deal with confrontation? And I think this will be a very important thing as we get into this in several ways, because then the next chapter is about giving helpful positive feedback, so how we can help people but be positive about it. And then the next chapter is about receiving negative feedback. So what do we do when people criticize us or they give us negative feedback? So we're going to get into that over the next few weeks. But I really, again, say that this particular topic about receiving positive feedback, I really believe is a good sign about where we're at in our lives. Well, that's going to end this episode on receiving positive feedback. As always, would love for you to leave me feedback either through comments on my website, firstthingsproductivity.com/39. You can leave me comments and ratings on iTunes, Stitcher, just different places that you listen to me on. Would greatly appreciate that. So until next time, remember this. You are deserving of compliments. It's not conceited. It's not the opposite of humility. True humility many times simply says thank you and respects the other person. True assertiveness is respecting what the other person thinks and feels. And so if that other person wants to pay you a compliment, your deepest respect is just a simple thank you. Again, go out into your work week, into your relationship week, this next week, and find one instance in which somebody pays you a compliment and luxuriate in it for just 5 seconds and simply say thank you and go on with your day. Embrace today with passion and intention, and don't die with your music still inside you.